Few experiences in life expose the reality of human nature as clearly as betrayal. When someone you trusted turns against you, the shock is not only emotional, it is psychological. It forces you to see people without the comforting illusions you once held about them. Trust often acts like a veil. It allows us to believe that loyalty, honesty, and goodwill exist in everyone at the same level that they exist within us. But betrayal tears that veil apart, revealing something deeper about the complexity of the human mind. Most people like to believe that relationships are built on simple principles: loyalty for loyalty, kindness for kindness, honesty for honesty. Yet human nature is rarely that simple. Beneath the surface of every personality lies a hidden layer of motivations, fears, insecurities, and unresolved conflicts. People do not always act according to what is morally right or emotionally fair. They act according to what protects their ego, their pride, or their hidden desires. Betrayal exposes this hidden layer. When someone betrays you, it is rarely a random act. It usually emerges from emotions that were already present beneath the surface. Envy, resentment, insecurity, or the desire for power can quietly grow within a person long before the act of betrayal itself occurs. These emotions often remain invisible because people hide them well. They smile, they offer support, and they appear loyal while secretly struggling with internal conflicts they cannot confront openly. Human beings have a remarkable ability to disguise their true feelings, even from themselves. A person may convince themselves that they are loyal while secretly resenting the success, strength, or authenticity of someone close to them. Instead of acknowledging these uncomfortable emotions, the mind protects itself by rationalizing harmful behavior. Betrayal then becomes a way to release tension that has been building silently within the psyche. This is why betrayal often feels so confusing. From your perspective, nothing seemed wrong. The relationship may have appeared strong, stable, even supportive, but inside the other person, a very different psychological process may have been unfolding. Their admiration may have slowly turned into comparison. Their comparison may have turned into insecurity, and their insecurity may have eventually turned into resentment. When resentment grows strong enough, loyalty begins to weaken. Human nature has a difficult relationship with perceived inferiority. When someone feels threatened by another person's strength, intelligence, authenticity, or independence, it can awaken uncomfortable emotions they struggle to manage. Instead of confronting their own weaknesses, some individuals unconsciously attempt to reduce the person who reminds them of those weaknesses. Betrayal becomes the tool. In this sense, betrayal is rarely about the victim. It is usually a reflection of the betrayer's internal conflict. The act reveals more about their psychological state than it does about the worth of the person who was betrayed. But betrayal also reveals something important about human awareness. Before betrayal occurs, people often ignore subtle warning signs. Small moments of jealousy, passive aggression, hidden criticism, or emotional distance may appear, but they are easily dismissed because trust encourages optimism. The mind prefers to maintain harmony rather than confront uncomfortable truths about someone we care about. Once betrayal happens, however, those small signs suddenly become clear. What once seemed harmless begins to make sense. The comments that once felt slightly uncomfortable reveal deeper meaning. The patterns of behavior that were once ignored suddenly appear obvious. Betrayal sharpens perception. It forces the mind to examine people more carefully. It pushes a person to observe behavior rather than simply believe words. This shift in awareness changes how someone understands relationships, loyalty, and human motives. The painful realization that not everyone values loyalty in the same way becomes a powerful psychological awakening. It reveals that human nature contains both light and shadow, generosity and selfishness, sincerity and hidden agendas. Trust, while beautiful, often blinds people to these contradictions within others. Betrayal removes that blindness and forces the mind to confront the deeper truth about human behavior, that people are not always what they appear to be, and the true nature of a person often reveals itself only when their interests, insecurities, or ambitions are challenged. Pain has a strange and powerful role in human life. Most people spend their entire existence trying to avoid it, escape it, or silence it. They seek comfort, stability, and emotional safety, believing that a peaceful life is one without suffering. Yet the paradox of human growth is that the moments that shape us the most are often the moments that hurt the deepest. Pain does something comfort never can. It forces awareness. When betrayal, loss, or disappointment enters a person's life, it disrupts the familiar structure of their inner world. The mind suddenly begins to question everything it once accepted without hesitation. Beliefs about people, trust, relationships, and even oneself start to collapse. At first, this experience feels like chaos. The emotional pain can be overwhelming because it challenges the identity a person once held. In many ways, pain acts like a psychological earthquake. It shakes the foundation of the self. The version of reality someone once believed in no longer feels stable. What once seemed certain becomes uncertain, and in that moment of confusion, the mind is forced to look inward. Most people rarely examine their inner world when life is comfortable. When everything seems stable, there is little reason to question habits, beliefs, or emotional patterns. Comfort allows the mind to remain asleep in routine. Pain, however, interrupts that sleep. It demands attention. When someone experiences betrayal or emotional suffering, a powerful inner dialogue begins. Questions start to emerge that may have never appeared before. Why did this happen? Why did I trust so easily? Why did I ignore the signs? Why did this affect me so deeply? These questions are not simply reactions to pain. They are the beginning of awareness. Pain pushes a person to confront parts of themselves they may have avoided for years. It reveals emotional dependencies, unconscious expectations, hidden fears, and patterns of behavior that were previously invisible. Someone may begin to realize that their need for approval made them vulnerable to manipulation. Another person may recognize that their fear of being alone caused them to tolerate unhealthy relationships. These realizations are rarely comfortable, but they are incredibly powerful. True self-awareness often begins in moments of emotional discomfort. When pain strips away illusions, the mind becomes capable of seeing itself more clearly. This process can feel unsettling because it challenges the identity someone once believed defined them. Yet it also creates the possibility for transformation. Suffering has a way of pushing individuals beyond the surface of their personality. Instead of living according to social expectations or unconscious habits, a person begins to explore deeper questions about meaning, purpose, and authenticity. They start to ask what truly matters in their life. They start to examine which relationships are genuine and which ones were built on illusion. Pain becomes the catalyst for this shift. When someone has experienced deep emotional wounds, they often develop a new level of psychological awareness. They become more observant of behavior, both in themselves and in others. They begin to notice patterns they once ignored. Small signals of dishonesty, insecurity, or manipulation become easier to recognize. Emotional maturity begins to grow from these observations. At the same time, pain can lead a person to rediscover their inner strength. Surviving emotional hardship reveals something important about the human spirit. It shows that resilience exists even in moments when a person feels broken. What once seemed impossible to endure gradually becomes part of one's experience. And with that realization comes a quiet sense of power. This transformation is rarely immediate. Self-awakening does not happen overnight. It is a slow and often uncomfortable process where awareness replaces illusion step by step. Old beliefs dissolve and new perspectives begin to form. A person starts to rely less on external validation and more on inner clarity. Through this process, suffering stops being merely an obstacle and becomes a teacher. The emotional wounds that once felt meaningless begin to reveal lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and personal responsibility. A deeper understanding of human nature emerges alongside a deeper understanding of oneself. Pain opens a door that comfort keeps closed. It pushes the mind beyond the surface of everyday life and forces it to confront the hidden dimensions of the psyche. What begins as suffering gradually becomes insight, and what once felt like destruction slowly reveals itself as the beginning of awareness. One of the most misunderstood aspects of human behavior is the way people project their inner conflicts onto others. Many of the negative judgments, criticisms, and betrayals we experience are not truly about us. Instead, they are reflections of something unresolved within the other person. Human beings carry hidden parts of themselves, traits, emotions, and desires they are unwilling or unable to accept. These hidden parts do not disappear simply because they are ignored. They remain active in the unconscious, quietly influencing perception and behavior. When someone refuses to confront their own insecurities, weaknesses, or darker impulses, the mind often protects itself through projection. Projection is a psychological process where a person attributes their own unwanted traits or emotions to someone else. Instead of acknowledging envy, resentment, or fear within themselves, they begin to see those qualities in another person. This creates a distorted perception of reality, where the external world becomes a mirror reflecting internal struggles. In many situations, the person chosen as the target of this projection is someone who unintentionally triggers those hidden feelings. Sometimes it is the individual who possesses qualities the other person secretly wishes they had. Confidence, independence, authenticity, intelligence, or emotional strength can all provoke uncomfortable comparisons. Rather than facing the painful awareness of their own limitations, the mind attempts to protect the ego by shifting the blame outward. The result is that the other person becomes a symbolic container for emotions that do not truly belong to them. This is why people are sometimes unfairly criticized or misunderstood, even when they have done nothing wrong. Someone might accuse you of arrogance simply because your confidence reminds them of their own insecurity. Another person may label you selfish because your ability to set boundaries exposes their habit of over-dependence. A colleague may resent your success, not because you harmed them, but because your progress forces them to confront their own feelings of inadequacy. These reactions are rarely conscious. Most people genuinely believe their judgments are accurate. The mind is skilled at creating convincing narratives that justify emotional reactions. When projection occurs, the person does not recognize that the qualities they are attacking in another person actually originate within themselves. The criticism feels real, the resentment feels justified, and the conflict appears to have a clear external cause. Yet the deeper psychological truth is that the conflict is internal. Projection becomes especially powerful in close relationships because emotional proximity intensifies unconscious dynamics. The people closest to us often activate the deepest parts of our psyche. Family members, friends, and partners can unintentionally trigger unresolved fears, childhood wounds, or hidden insecurities. When these feelings surface, some individuals lack the self-awareness necessary to process them internally. Instead, they react outwardly. They accuse, blame, criticize, or distance themselves from the person who awakened those uncomfortable emotions. What they fail to realize is that they are not responding to the other person as they truly are. They are responding to the internal image their own mind has created. Being the target of someone else's projection can be confusing and painful. It can make a person question their own identity, wondering if the accusations or judgments might somehow be true. Over time, however, awareness of this psychological process brings clarity. When you begin to recognize how projection operates, you realize that many conflicts are not truly about your behavior, but about the emotional struggles of the other person. This understanding changes the way you interpret criticism and hostility. Instead of automatically internalizing negative judgments, you begin to observe them more carefully. You start asking whether the reaction you are receiving reflects your actions or whether it might reveal something about the inner world of the person expressing it. This shift in perception creates emotional distance from unnecessary guilt or self-doubt. It allows you to see that people often respond not to who you are, but to what your presence awakens within them. Your authenticity, growth, or independence can act as a mirror that reflects hidden aspects of their personality they would rather avoid. In this way, the conflicts and betrayals you experience sometimes reveal less about your character and more about the psychological shadows carried by others, shadows that become visible only when they encounter someone whose presence unconsciously forces them to face the parts of themselves they have spent years trying to ignore. When people experience betrayal, their first instinct is often to react. The emotional shock creates an intense urge to explain, defend, confront, or seek justice. The mind begins searching for answers, wanting the other person to acknowledge the harm they caused. Many individuals feel the need to prove their innocence or demand an explanation for the betrayal they endured. Yet in many situations, the most powerful response is neither confrontation nor retaliation. The most powerful response is silence and distance. Silence has a unique psychological effect that most people underestimate. When someone expects a reaction and receives none, it disrupts their expectations. Many individuals rely on emotional responses from others to validate their actions. When they betray someone, they often anticipate anger, confrontation, or desperate attempts to repair the relationship. These reactions give them a sense of control over the situation. Emotional responses create a dynamic where the betrayer still influences the emotional state of the person they hurt. Silence removes that influence. When a person refuses to engage in arguments or explanations, They reclaim their psychological independence. The absence of reaction creates a space where manipulation, blame, shifting, or emotional games can no longer operate effectively. Silence sends a message without the need for words. It communicates that the individual has stepped outside the emotional battlefield entirely. Distance reinforces this message. Physical or emotional distance allows a person to regain clarity after betrayal. When someone remains close to the source of emotional harm, their mind stays entangled in the conflict. Thoughts constantly return to the situation, searching for meaning or replaying painful moments. This cycle keeps the emotional wound active. Distance interrupts this pattern by removing the constant reminder of the betrayal. With time and separation, the mind begins to reorganize its thoughts. What once felt overwhelming slowly becomes easier to observe objectively. Patterns of behavior that were once confusing begin to make sense. Emotional intensity decreases, allowing awareness and insight to replace reaction. Distance also restores personal boundaries. When betrayal occurs, boundaries have usually been crossed in some form. Trust may have been exploited, loyalty taken for granted, or kindness misunderstood as weakness. By creating distance, a person reestablishes the limits that were previously ignored. This act is not about punishment or revenge. It is about protecting one's psychological well-being. Many people fear silence and distance because they worry it might appear as weakness or avoidance. In reality, it often requires more strength than confrontation. Reacting emotionally can feel satisfying in the moment because it releases frustration. Silence, however, requires discipline. It demands that a person resist the impulse to argue, justify, or seek validation from someone who has already demonstrated a lack of respect. True power in human relationships does not come from dominating others through force or emotional intensity. It comes from self-control, the ability to remain calm and composed in the face of betrayal reveals a level of inner stability that cannot easily be manipulated. When someone chooses silence, they stop feeding the emotional conflict that betrayal often creates. The drama ends because one side refuses to participate in it. This absence of reaction can be deeply unsettling for those who expected chaos or confrontation. Without an emotional response to provoke, their sense of control disappears. At the same time, silence allows a person to redirect their energy inward. Instead of spending time analyzing the behavior of the person who betrayed them, they begin focusing on their own growth, priorities, and self-understanding. Emotional energy that was once invested in conflict becomes available for personal development. Distance also changes perspective. When a person steps away from a harmful dynamic, they begin to see how much influence it once had over their emotional state. The constant stress, confusion, or tension becomes visible only after it is no longer present. What once seemed normal begins to appear unhealthy or unnecessary. Through silence and distance, a person gradually rebuilds their inner balance. They learn to value peace over argument and clarity over emotional chaos. The absence of constant conflict allows them to reconnect with their own thoughts and priorities. This quiet separation creates a form of strength that cannot be forced or imitated. It emerges naturally when someone refuses to remain trapped in dynamics that diminish their sense of self. Silence stops the cycle of reaction, and distance restores the space necessary for awareness and self-respect to grow within the mind. When someone betrays you, they usually believe they understand the outcome of their actions. In their mind, betrayal creates a predictable result. They imagine you will feel defeated, broken, or emotionally dependent on their approval. They assume the pain they caused will weaken you, leaving you confused and unable to recover your sense of stability. This belief gives them a quiet sense of control over the situation. They think they know how your story will end. What they rarely anticipate is transformation. Betrayal often begins as a painful disruption in a person's life. It shakes trust, damages emotional security, and leaves behind a deep sense of confusion. In the beginning, the mind struggles to understand what happened. Thoughts circle endlessly around the same questions. Why did they do this? How could someone I trusted act this way? Was the relationship ever real? These questions reflect the mind's attempt to restore order after a sudden emotional shock. Yet as time passes, something subtle begins to change within in the person who experienced the betrayal. The intense emotional reactions that once dominated their thoughts slowly begin to evolve into reflection. Instead of focusing only on the actions of the betrayer, the mind starts to explore deeper questions about identity, boundaries, and self-awareness. This is where transformation begins. Pain forces individuals to examine aspects of themselves that they may have ignored when life felt comfortable. They begin to notice patterns in their relationships, moments where they ignored warning signs, or times when they placed too much trust in someone who had not truly earned it. These realizations are not meant to create guilt or self-blame. Instead, they provide insight into how emotional decisions are often influenced by unconscious habits. Through this process, a person begins to develop stronger awareness of their own needs and limits. They start recognizing the importance of boundaries that protect their emotional well-being. Situations that once felt normal may suddenly appear unhealthy or unbalanced. The individual learns to distinguish between genuine connection and relationships that depend on manipulation or emotional dependency. As this awareness grows, something else begins to shift. The person who once sought approval or validation from others gradually becomes less dependent on it. Betrayal often teaches a powerful lesson about the instability of relying on external loyalty for one's sense of worth. When that loyalty disappears, it forces the individual to look inward for stability. Inner strength begins to form in the absence of old illusions. This strength does not appear dramatically. It develops quietly through reflection, experience, and emotional resilience. The person who once questioned their value starts to recognize their own capacity to endure hardship and continue moving forward. Confidence begins to emerge, not from the opinions of others, but from the understanding that survival itself is evidence of inner power. This transformation changes how the individual interacts with the world around them. Their perception of relationships becomes sharper and more balanced. They become more selective about the people they allow into their inner circle. Trust is no longer given automatically, but offered carefully to those who demonstrate consistency and respect. At the same time, emotional independence grows stronger. The person who once feared losing certain relationships realizes that their sense of identity does not depend on anyone else's approval or loyalty. This realization brings a quiet freedom. They are no longer driven by the need to please everyone or maintain connections that undermine their self-respect. From the outside, this transformation can appear subtle. The individual may simply seem calmer, more confident, or less reactive to the opinions of others. Yet internally, a profound shift has taken place. The experience that once felt like destruction has become a source of clarity. The betrayer rarely anticipates this outcome. They expected weakness, but instead they witness resilience. They expected emotional collapse, but instead they see growth. The person they believed would remain wounded has evolved into someone who understands human nature more deeply and trusts their own judgment more than before. Betrayal was intended to diminish someone's strength, yet it often creates the conditions that lead to greater self-awareness, stronger boundaries, and a more authentic sense of identity that emerges from the lessons hidden within painful experiences and the gradual realization that personal evolution can arise from moments that once seemed like irreversible loss